Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guests, Marc Fasteau and Ian Fletcher. And they're here to share with us their new book, Industrial Policy for the United States, Winning the Competition for Good Jobs and High-Value Industries. Why is now the most crucial time to understand trade relations? Well, today's guests are going to dive into just that. So Marc Fasteau is a former investment banker and founder of an insurance company that is now a division of Progressive. Early in his career, he served on the professional staffs of the U.S. Senate Majority Leader, the House Banking and Currency Committee, and the Joint Economic Committee. He has been involved in questions of international trade and industrial policy for 18 years and is a vice chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. He is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, where he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. Ian Fletcher is the author of Free Trade Doesn't Work, What Should Replace It and Why, and the co-author of The Conservative Case Against Free Trade. He was previously senior economist at the Coalition for a Prosperous America, on whose advisory board he now serves. Earlier in his career, he was research fellow at the U.S. Business and Industry Council and an economic analyst in private practice. His writings on trade policy have been published in the Huffington Post, the American Thinker, Real World Economic Review, Bloomberg News, and many more. He was educated at Columbia and the University of Chicago. So welcome to the show, Marc Fasteau and Ian Fletcher.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
What an honor it is to have the both of you here to talk about this book. So what inspired you to write this book?
I think we both started thinking about trade policy first as a subject in and of itself. And after a couple of years, began to think about, well, if you really think about what kind of trade policy you want, you have to think about what kind of economy do you want to have, not just next year, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And think about that, trade policy becomes a very important part of an overall, you call it overall economic policy. It's really industrial policy because it focuses differentially on the more important industries in the country. So that led me to think, well, okay, we've got to write a book about industrial policy. So we're not just left in this important but singular silo of trade policy.
So why do you think this topic is so important now?
The United States has come to the end of what you can call the neoliberal era or the globalist era or whatever you want to call it. So my first book, which came out in 2010, was called Free Trade Doesn't Work. And at the time that came out, there was almost nobody who agreed with me. And now the United States has been through enough of a crisis, and we've had the election of Trump twice, that people have kind of understood now that free trade is not necessarily the best policy. And we're trying to figure out what the correct tariff policy would look like for the United States. Now, if you say we're not going to have free trade, you start raising questions like, okay, if an absolutely free market is not the right answer internationally, are you sure it's right domestically? I mean, we are absolutely big fans of free markets in their right place, but there are certain things they can't do. And if you're not going to have free trade and you look at what foreign countries have done to us in terms of trade, you discover that one of the things they've done is that they've exported certain products to us in such a way that they end up with a very strong industry in certain sectors, and we don't. So trade necessarily raises the question of what kind of industries do you want your country to have? And the old answer was whatever the free market gives us is going to be correct. Now, that's no longer tenable. So, if you want to do something about it, you first got to figure out why are certain industries more important than others? And then what can you do as a country to bring it about that you get those industries rather than others? And that's what our book is really about.
Your book really touches on this how successful industrial policies are in other countries. Can you share? I know you've kind of touched on that a little bit, but can you share a little bit more about that so we have a better, broader understanding of it?
Sure. Well, China, of course, is the most extreme and the most current example, but the Japanese have done it a lot more politely, but equally successfully. So has Korea. France has done pretty well, successes and failures. But basically, the idea is that the government, in collaboration with industry, decides which industries are what we call in the book advantageous. They can be high tech, but they're not all high tech. Any industry which employs a significant number of people and a significant amount of capital and pays good wages, not necessarily the highest, it is advantageous. Those are industries that, uh, as a country, we want to keep. In other words, protect them from being taken away. Uh, that we want to do the basic science and then the commercialization of that science to the point where the private industry can take it over. So we get the next generation of those industries. So, well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, and you can look at these other countries, they prioritize the research for the new industries. And then, very importantly, they have prioritized the commercialization of pure research. In other words, they subsidize the development, the government subsidize the development from not pure research to a commercially viable product, which is where the private sector should and does, if you give them the opportunity, pick it up and run with it. So what does that mean? It means government research, it means government subsidy, and then they also support these policies by not only sort of paying internally to have the work done, but to subsidize the commercial production of these products so that they can underprice, for example, US competing products that are made in the United States. So that means that they take over, let's say it's EVs look like a pretty good example these days. Um, if China is left without allowed to do what it wants to do without opposition or protection, they will own the US EV vehicle market, and the US will not have an industry anymore. That's partly because they're technologically more advanced at the moment, but also because they've given the industry, I'm not just talking about the research now, but the commercial industry, very large subsidies so they can greatly underprice in the U.S. market and take it over. So that's been repeated with solar panels, which were still dominated by China. And in both cases, the correct response has been from the U.S. to put tariffs on imports of those products and to ramp up our own sort of research and development programs to make competitive and possibly even leapfrog the technologies of these imported products.
Thank you for taking the time to share that. That really, when you break it down that way, it really makes a lot of sense. And I know that your book identifies three pillars of industrial policy. Can you share that with us?
Sure. The first pillar is the US has got to do something about the overvalued dollar. That has been a gigantic sleeper issue in our country for years now. It's even more important than tariffs for determining our balance of trade. The balance of trade is basically our imports minus our exports. So it's whether we are importing more than we export or vice versa. And when you import more than you export, you have what's called a trade deficit. And When you have a trade deficit, you lose jobs, you suffer deindustrialization and loss of industrial capacity and technical skills, and you also go into debt to foreigners because if you don't pay for your imports with your exports, you've got to pay for them either by selling off your existing assets or by going into debt. Anyway, the US trade deficit in goods, we have a much smaller surplus in services still, but the trade deficit in goods has gotten to about $1 trillion a year. And if you want to put that back in balance, tariffs are going to help you a bit. But what you really need to do is bring down the value of the dollar, which is currently overvalued by, we estimate, maybe 16% against a basket of foreign currencies. And that makes imports more expensive here, just like a tariff does. And it makes American exports cheaper overseas. So they become more competitive. That way, you have a finger on both pans of the scale, and you can move our trade back into balance. Now, the second pillar, Mark described it very ably already, which is the use of government to support not just the development of pure science, but the development of useful technology. You see, the idea in this country for a long time has been that government should do pure science and then everything else should be in the private sector. But if you actually go look at the technological history of where did jet planes come from, where did the internet come from, where did satellites come from, it even includes lactose-free milk. There's a ton of stuff where it wasn't just governmental science, it was government developed the technology, and then they turn the technology loose and people commercialize it. So the third pillar is tariffs, because the great thing about a tariff, as opposed to just getting the value of the dollar down, the great thing about a tariff is you can focus on specific industries. For example, I think most Americans will instinctively understand, even if they can't explain the economic reasons why, they instinctively understand that the US can't be a serious country without an automobile industry. We just wouldn't be. They're right. And so that's why Joe Biden put the 100% tariff on Chinese electric cars. You also need an aircraft industry, particularly if you're going to be a superpower. And that's behind a lot of this. It's not even a matter of prosperity. It's a matter of if we're going to be able to defend ourselves, you can't defend a country with websites and stock market transactions. You have to defend it with these machines, which are generally made of steel or aluminum, and they contain electronics and an energy source. I'm talking tanks, aircraft, missiles, you name it. These are manufactured goods. You need steel production. You need aluminum production. You need a body of skilled workers who can operate assembly lines and make them work properly. You need engineers who are skilled in manufacturing. If you lose your manufacturing sector, you lose all that. So that's going to be one type of industry that we're going to be set on protecting. I mean, Trump just put in a tariff on steel and aluminum. He's right.
So let me add a little bit. I agree with absolutely everything. Add a little coda. First, we talked about currency and an overvalued dollar. Well, some people who oppose doing anything about this call it a strong dollar. So, strong, good, weak dollar, bad. It's kind of very simple-minded thinking about it. What is the correct value of the dollar? There's only one measure that makes any sense, and that is the level that balances trade. And that's supposed to happen automatically in a free currency market, because if you're running a deficit, the value of your dollar should go down. So you import less and export more, and vice versa. Well, that doesn't happen for a couple of reasons. One is that some countries manipulate their currencies. They sterilize the dollars that they get. They put them in an account. They don't put them back on the market, where if they did, the value would go down. More stuff goes on the market, the price of whatever you're selling goes down. And the other is that it has nothing to do with governments. It's the fact, it arises from the fact that the U.S. market is the most attractive capital market in the world still, I mean, despite some of the shenanigans that are going on today. So we have historically, for quite a long time, had a big excess of incoming capital from private investors as opposed to outgoing. So a big net inflow of capital. Well, what does that do? If you want to invest in the US market, you have to buy dollars because you need dollars to buy securities and so on and treasuries. So that pushes that more demand, price goes up. So that is both those factors have pushed the dollar way above the level that would balance trade. So in our book, Industrial Policy for the United States, we propose a solution, a set of solutions, including one to deal with this private excess of inflow of capital. So the other thing I'd like to comment on, and we both talked about this a little bit, is how important the government is in generating real breakthrough new products. Private sector will increment at the edges, they'll refine a product and so on. But the risks and the time horizons for developing the things that really going to make a difference are generally, the risks are too high and the time periods are too long for the private sector to do it. So they don't. So that's why the government represents the people in a sense. It has a longer time horizon. And that's the rationale economically for doing it. And it's absolutely essential. And I have to say, it's very distressing to see what Elon Musk and his guys are trying to do to two of the crown jewels of American industrial policy. One is the National Institutes of Health, which is the world leading developer of new drug technologies. And supports a highly profitable, advantageous industry, the pharma industry in the U.S. And then just announced they want to make 20 to 50% cuts in the National Science Foundation, which NIH does medical. National Science Foundation funds mostly pure research, but not just pure research, in all the other sciences. Again, these are two of our most successful industrial policies. I mean, look, every institution can be improved, but taking a meat axe to these crown jewels is a mistake.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick moment. We've been speaking with Marc Fasteau and Ian Fletcher in regards to their new book, Industrial Policy for the United States, Winning the Competition for Good Jobs and High-Value Industries. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Are you an author, speaker, or expert who is looking for more publicity? Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up for free interview requests from shows looking for guests. Radio Guest List is the #1 free booking resource for radio, podcasts, and TV talk shows who are looking for experts like you right now. Visit radioguestlist.com and sign up today to get the visibility you deserve.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
It's one thing to become attached to your perfect home, but what do you do when that home becomes attached to you? A family in dire need of a fresh start, a mysterious house tied to the past. Buried deep within the foundation of the old Far Hill Manor lies a centuries-old secret. Dark forces or something stronger just waiting to be discovered. Caretaker, a supernatural thriller by breakout authors R.J. Halpert.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Mary Ann. We're here today with special guests, Marc Fasteau and Ian Fletcher, in regards to their new book, Industrial Policy for the United States, Winning the Competition for Good Jobs and High-Value Industries. Do you think that Trump is doing too much, not enough right now? What are your thoughts?
Well, we said in our new book, Industrial Policy for the United States, which is on Amazon, by the way, that Trump's big achievement in his first term, and just to be clear to everyone, neither Mark nor I are Trump supporters. Our personal and professional politics is very bipartisan with respect to this stuff. In Trump's first term, the big thing he did is he destroyed the myth, the credibility of the idea of free trade that this country had been applying for decades in a more and more extreme fashion. There had long been a suspicion among Democrats that free trade was a racket. But every time they said that, the standard answer from Republicans, whether it's on the floor of the Senate or around the Thanksgiving dinner table, was, "You idiot, you're ignorant of economics. You don't know what you're talking about. Real economics proves that free trade is best, even if you don't think so." So when you had a critique of free trade come from the Republican side, it was devastating, particularly because Trump is right. I mean, I've been aware of this since my 2010 book, Free Trade Doesn't Work. If you actually zoom in on all the arguments for free trade, all the things that people tell you economists have proved, they haven't. It's full of holes. So Trump kind of kicked that door in, and he applied a relatively small number of tariffs. I mean, he made a lot of noise, but in his first term, the average U.S. tariff went from 2% to 3%. The average tariff on Chinese goods went from 3% to 19%. So he didn't actually do all that much. Now, fast forward to his second term. Joe Biden, interestingly enough, seconded Trump on the trade issue, despite obviously despising the man on every other possible issue, by adding new tariffs of his own. We already mentioned the electric car tariff. Now, Trump has just started his second term. Honestly, I don't know where this is going to end up because, for one thing, none of us knows what fraction of what Trump says he actually means. Now, you can call me an optimist, but I think this business of taking over Canada, I think that's a fiction. I'm not quite sure what his intent is. Maybe it's just to distract people. When he talks about applying more tariffs on China, he's already done another 10% on China, which was good. He proposed these tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Then very rapidly, he says, "Oh, they have satisfied my demands. We're going to suspend these tariffs." So no, we're not going to have tariffs on Canada and Mexico. There have been all sorts of statements of his that could be gleaned from his speeches, statements of his advisor, like Peter Navarro is his counselor on trade and manufacturing. He's someone that Mark and I both know. And the indication is that there's going to be something more strategically serious. I mean, Trump has spoken just now about he wants tariff on automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and I forget what the third one was.
Well, there are some other initiatives. First of all, his new head of the Council of Economic Advisors, and this is a first, as far as at least my living memory, and I'm pretty old. Um, the the president's memorandum on an American first trade policy has a directive for the Secretary of the Treasury, which I don't think anybody has done, post World War II, that says look for the reasons why we have a trade deficit, and consider also the uh, the misalignment of the U.S. dollar. Misalignment is a term that's been developed to refer to the net excess capital flow into the United States, and other reasons for the overvaluation, and come up with solutions. That's new. That's an issue that Ian and I and the organization that we're both associated with, Coalition for Prosperous America, has been pushing for years, and it's been like pushing on a string. So that's a breakthrough. They've also talked pretty clearly about ending the something called the de minimis rule, which allows up to uh, imports and value up no more than $800 to come in absolutely tariff-free and virtually inspection-free, because uh, so many packages come in the billions every year. And that's not even counted in our trade deficit. And it's a route for fentanyl to be shipped to your door without inspection. And beyond that, the way it works is uh, big orders are broken up into smaller packages and they're shipped in. Anyway, it adds billions to our nominal trade deficit. So there's talk about that. And there's also been a recognition, not just in this administration, but certainly the new USTR as well, where U.S. Trade Representative is well aware of it, that the tariffs on Chinese steel and other goods have been effective in terms of reducing our direct deficit with China, but not effective in reducing our overall trade deficit, because a lot of those products are made in China and transshipped and relabeled and often mislabeled as coming from other countries, which have not been subject to tariffs. So those things seem to be brewing, and they certainly make sense. There are congressional initiatives, bipartisan, on both those questions. In fact, one of the interesting things about industrial policy is that it is inherently a nonpartisan issue. Democrats may weight their approval a little more toward the jobs and the social benefits, and Republicans may weight it more heavily toward it supporting businesses and investment. But those things overlap with a good industrial policy, and that's very excuse me, that's very important, because you have to have bipartisan support for these policies to have legs, to endure. And they are long-term policies. You don't get big results in a year or 2 years. So continuity is hugely expensive. And having bipartisan appeal of these policies is very important for that reason.
What changes, and I know this is probably like the $1 million question here, but what changes are needed to ensure U.S. industries can compete globally?
Well, the things we've been talking about, we need a rightly valued dollar. Otherwise, we have a gigantic headwind against everything. We need selective tariffs so that the really important industries that we have to have in this country, we will have. And we need support for development of new technologies, which are only getting more and more important. There are a million details to it, but that's the agenda as far as we're concerned.
We need to protect our new technology that we develop here from being flying out overseas, either because they're stolen or because we don't have institutions, financial or the government, that steps in to finance the different stages of a small enterprise that starts off and then does a prototype and then tries tests a market and so on. At different stages, I was an investment banker for 14 years. You need institutions will step in to finance the next stage. When you don't have that, and there's a history of this, well, who's willing to do it? Well, the Chinese are very willing to do it. So if where the money comes in, control follows, and then you have a Chinese company that is making the products that we developed. So there are things like that, which are related to and support these larger trade and industrial policy measures.
Well, I found your book, Industrial Policy for the United States, to be such an educational and powerful piece. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Sure. We have a website at industrialpolicy.us, and that's where you can find about the book. I have a personal website at ianfletcher.com, and Marc has a personal website at marcfasteau.com. Just to let you know, he spells his name with a C, not a K, and it's FASTEAU.com.
Thank you. So on the website, you can see all the folks who've endorsed it, starting with former Senator Rubio, now Secretary of State Rubio on the Republican side, the former minority ranking member on the House Ways and Means Trade Committee has endorsed it, and a whole array of pretty prominent academicians, economists, both here and abroad.
But don't mistake it for a book that's only aimed at the eggheads. We worked real hard to write a book that the ordinary concerned citizen could understand because, frankly, the American people have been ahead of the politicians on this issue, and the instincts of the average American have been closer to what's correct than the average denizen of Washington.
That's a really interesting point, and it's one that struck us both very hard at different times, writing the book and before. The idea we've been told, and this is almost every American economist, the more prominent they are, that focuses on trade, has been telling Americans, yes, you might lose your manufacturing job, but you'll get a better job in a more advanced industry that'll pay even more, and everybody will be better off. It just hasn't worked that way. And the people on the ground who are affected know this. The jobs, it's even when we have full employment, like now, yes, you lose your manufacturing job, you'll get another job, but it may be flipping hamburgers, which pays less, substantially less, and also, honestly, doesn't have the same dignity as actually making something. And that's part of my reason for writing the book is when the economics go bad for a large chunk of the American population, so do the politics. People get desperate. And my view has been that for 40 years, both parties have bought the Kool-Aid on free trade. And people are tired of the promises. It's been an equal opportunity disaster here for both parties. So when Trump came along and said what they're thinking and actually correct about, hey, this really isn't working, something's really wrong here, and he threw this wrench in the gear. I understand the appeal. I mean, it was appealing to, okay, I hear this real serious problem. Now, it's got the solutions. No, you threw the right wrench in the gears to get started, that's for sure.
Yeah, one optimistic note I would add is one thing we learned writing the book is that almost all of the policies the United States needs to have, almost all of the institutions we need to have to do what we need to do, these are either things we've done at some point in the past, like tariffs. Certainly had that. Managing currency, we were doing that under Reagan, under Nixon, and technology development. We have institutions like the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, which was renamed Manufacturing USA, which is a great technology arm of the government. It's just way too small. So we are not suggesting America do anything that it can't do, it doesn't know how to do, that it's never done, that isn't workable. Almost everything we want, to some extent, we have or used to have that thing, but either we don't have it now or what we have now is far too small. It's got a budget of millions when it needs to be billions.
Yeah, including, for example, robotics. Robotics for civilian use. We spend a lot on space robotics and military robotics. So I've been quite optimistic. Right now, I think I'm very optimistic that the tariffs will come out approximately right, and that for the first time, we will be addressing the overvaluation of the dollar. It's still early days on the other stuff, but I am concerned that what we've seen announced and begun to have happen for National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, if that continues and deepens, we're actually undercutting the third, I forget which number it is, but the pillar of government research and support for commercialization, which is equally important. So I hope that does not take hold and continue.
Well, your book is just phenomenal. Mark and Ian, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Our pleasure.
Well, thank you, Mark and Ian. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about industrial policy for the United States, winning the competition for good jobs and high-value industries. To learn more about their book, please visit industrialpolicy.us. Industrial Policy for the United States is available to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And remember, support our indie bookstores. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask for them to order it. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.